week 11 in the Gospel of Luke. In our SOAP videos here, we're covering about 2 chapters this week, about halfway through 13 through halfway through 15.
Man, making everybody read a bunch this week.
It's not that bad.
Yeah, it's not at all.
Even in Luke, chapter 14 is not long. So it's not that bad. It's not that difficult. But again, a lot of little things, and
right.
You can just bullet point through what we're hitting, and then we'll pick out a couple of big things to talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah, exactly. And we're continuing with Jesus, who had gone through a shift a couple weeks ago. We're still seeing that ramifications of that, and Jesus is now making his way towards Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So you can see the message is getting a little tighter. Soon time is going to be running short, yeah. and it's going to get more and more serious. Yeah. But for this week, there's a couple long sections as he's traveling down to Jerusalem. There's the narrow door to talk about, and I definitely want to talk about that one in more detail. Jesus even says he's going to Jerusalem. There's another healing on the Sabbath. We had one last week, and there's another one this week. There is seeking seats of honor. I think Jesus is at a banquet, or he tells people when you're at a banquet, hey, don't go sit at the head table. Sit at the last table. And it's much better for somebody to come get you and take you to a better seat than to demote you from
I think that's just common sense. I mean, that's not even theological. That's just like common sense. Why let somebody else
Right. But it also doesn't mean everybody go sit at the bad table. So
go sit at
you
the
got 100 people
table.
100 people to move. Right. There's a number of parables in here. Parable of the great banquet. There's a parable of the lost sheep and coin. And then in between there's the counting the cost of becoming a disciple. That's the other one that I wanted to hit on.
Yeah.
I know we were talking a little bit with the camera off on the parable of the lost sheep and coin. That actually shows up in chapter 15.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And you separated it out just to get the reading.
Yeah, just to help with the reading.
Yeah.
I don't like splitting chapter 15. Everybody wants to split chapter 15 because the lost sheep and the lost coin, they go together. That's real obvious. And then you have the prodigal son, or as the net puts it, the compassionate father.
Yeah, nice. Let's just switch it.
Well, yeah. It's not really about the son. It's really about the father. Right?
But also a longer story. So just from splitting readings, you either had to include all of chapter 15 or you had to cut it off.
Yeah, when we were creating the card, the readings, right?
Not us writing the Bible.
Yeah. But I'd like to talk about all of 15, even though we're not reading all of it this week. I'd like to talk about it as a whole.
Okay.
Because the lost sheep, lost coin, and lost son is really what it is.
The same thing, just something being lost 3 times.
Yeah.
Same story, maybe with more detail.
Yeah, the prodigal son, obviously, the lost son has a lot more detail to it because he's wrapping it up. And that's the thing, because in chapter 15, verse 1, now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming to hear him, but the Pharisees and the experts in the law were complaining, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So he told them a parable. Not just the sheep, not just the coin, but also the son, because you come to the end of 15, and the other son was the one who was acting like the Pharisees. The older brother was acting like the Pharisees. This person,
He gave him everything.
Exactly. So if you don't put the parable of the lost son as part of the overall parable, it's really 3 acts of the same parable.
Yeah, interesting.
And that it bookends then with the Pharisees. You got the tax collectors and the Pharisees against the older brother and the younger brother. Or the younger brother, the older brother, to keep the parallel. And a lot of people want to use this as an evangelistic. He went out and found the sheep who was lost, and he brought it back, and found the coin and found the son. What we miss is that this is not an evangelism passage. It's not meant to be an evangelism passage the way we would think of it. In each of the 3 cases, the thing that was lost was already in at one point. It was already the shepherd's sheep.
So if you can't lose your salvation,
exactly.
You're just on hiatus for a while, or you're just lost.
Right, you're just lost. And so maybe you could say it's the restoration, because it's really about Israel. These tax collectors and sinners that the Pharisees love to complain about were in covenant with God under the law. And they looked at the Pharisees and said, I can never keep up with that. And so they wandered away. And they were trusting on their heritage. Jesus said, I came to seek and save the lost. Right? And today we think of that as evangelism. In this case, he's saying, these are people who are supposed to be in. You've chased them away. I'm trying to get them back.
Yeah, interesting.
So the sheep, the shepherd already owned the sheep. The woman already owned the coin. It was her coin, right? And it ran away, and she scoured the house to find it.
Right.
The son was already a son.
Right. Right. Took his inheritance and left.
Yeah. But he was
still the son.
But the father
That
was
didn't
always
change.
waiting. Yeah, that didn't change. The sonship never changed. The father didn't kick him out, didn't disown him, didn't, whatever. He was always going to be the son. In fact, he had already had his inheritance, like you said. Right. He could not lose any more. He wasted it, but he couldn't lose any more. He could never lose the sonship. And so, there is, from a church standpoint, obviously we want to evangelize and people need to hear the gospel, but that's not what that chapter is really about. That chapter, if we wanted to apply it today, would be more about backsliding, people, Christians who had wandered away, who need to hear the love of the Father, the compassionate Father. They need to know that He's...
But if we take it in context of chapter 13 and 14, maybe 12, where Jesus is now telling Israel, guys, you got to come back.
Yeah.
And he said it over and over a number of different ways. He's criticizing the Pharisees and the experts of the law.
Yep.
He's saying it a number of different ways. I think last week it was with a tree, right?
Yeah.
And
it's really about the kingdom. It's about I wanted to bring the kingdom and I wanted to invite you all in. And in fact, you wanted to talk about chapter 14, which is a huge discipleship passage about, which is also actually there's a passage that is usually used for evangelism. Call them all in. The people who were invited didn't want to come, so call everybody else. But again, the people in that story were already in. They just didn't either know it or they didn't know they were lost. They had to be told they were lost.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really a kingdom passage. It's really, but again, like we said last week, there are principles even in passages that are not directly related to us. And I think we see a lot of these in here. There's a lot of banquet stuff going on in this one too, by the way. The kingdom of God is like a banquet. That's sort of the whole. We see that in Song of Songs. He invites me to his banquet table, and just sort of.
Well, especially now with the virus, there are no banquets, right? Weddings are completely different, but back in the day, there were 3-4 day weddings.
Yeah,
seven.
Yeah,
huge banquets and all around food.
Yeah. I had only one other thing and then you wanted to talk about some of this other stuff more. In chapter 13, verse 31, at that time, some Pharisees came up and said to Jesus, "Get away from here because Herod wants to kill you." We've been pounding on the Pharisees a lot recently,
right?
Because and for good reason. But there were some. We think of Nicodemus. We think of there were some others, who
they were trying to help.
I love the fact that Luke included these guys in here who were trying to protect Jesus. Yeah. Now, I like his response too. His response is like Nehemiah's. You can tell. In fact, it says you can tell that fox. I have important work that I'm doing, and if he wants to find me, here's where I'm going to be. I love that response.
So I was never sure how to take that, whether they were in league with Herod and they were trying to get Jesus to run, or if they were trying to be kind and actually give him a heads up.
I read it as some Pharisees said get out, protect. So it could be I could be reading it wrong. It could be some kind of coy. Let's see if we can.
See a lot.
Let's see if we can shake him into or chase him into the
Wherever.
hole, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Trap him.
Yeah. I'd like to think that there were some. We know Nicodemus and others were all actually on Jesus' side, and and even though he didn't name, but I do like that. You go tell that fox. he can find me on the third day over there if he really wants to get me. But since he's not, I've got work to do, so I'm going to keep doing my work. I love that.
Yeah. Well, I had a couple I wanted to talk about. The first one's the narrow door, and I'm sure you get questions on this all the time, but Jesus tells us to come through the narrow door. So it gives a picture as the way to heaven is to go through a narrow door. And if there's a narrow door, that means there's also a wide door someplace. Right? So the whole question is, what are we supposed to get out of this? And what are we supposed to do? Does that mean only, because it's a narrow door, does that mean only a limited number of people can go through it? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah, right. It doesn't seem that way. It may mean that it's harder.
Yeah.
And it definitely means that it's maybe different than what you think. And you kind of come up with the concept of a bunch of sinners all going together, all walking down the road together, and people are just following the person ahead of them. And you just have a stream of people. And I also like to think the same way from a church standpoint. Sometimes that happens in church too, where people just follow other, quote, Christians. And they're just going through the motion, but maybe they haven't made a personal acceptance of Christ yet.
Yeah, they think they're on the path, but they don't even have faith, right?
Right.
They're not even on the right path.
I must be okay because I go to church. I must be okay because I do this, when they haven't accepted Christ in their life yet. Yeah. So it's kind of a huge thing.
In the Sermon on the Mount, there was it's very similar, the wide path versus the narrow path, right? Not just the gate or the door, but the path as well. And you're right, people say, well, that just means that most people are not going to be in heaven or whatever.
Right. Well, I can remember thinking, okay, when I die, I'm going to be on a path, and there's going to be a bunch of other people who are going to be walking along, and I got to look off to the side.
Oh,
right?
Nice, yeah.
But
isn't it amazing how we interpret things when we're little?
Yeah,
and
exactly. And
it's funny. Yeah.
And it's going to be hidden.
I think it just means that it's exclusive. There are a gazillion ways to not get to God, because there's only one way to get to Jesus. Said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." So, literally, every other way is the wrong way. It can be as wide, it can as whatever. Right. It's not narrow because God doesn't want anybody to come through.
Right.
There's not a quota, right? But it's very exclusive. It's very narrow as to how you
get in. Nice.
Yes.
The other one I wanted to talk about was counting the cost, and this is more about discipleship, and kind of an interesting passage, and really what I like about it is maybe something that I might not have done, and that is discipleship comes at a cost, and the whole idea is before you build a house, you determine how much this house is going to cost. You figure out what are you going to spend, how much does the land cost, what's the foundation going to cost, everything that's going to cost. We don't often do that with discipleship.
Right.
We jump in, or somebody says, "Hey, can you make coffee?" And they're just kind of reeling you in, and then we need coffee next week too, to get you to keep coming. It's certainly worthwhile, but there is a cost to discipleship, and that cost can be some of your friends before, and I'd put friends in air quotes. Are they really your friends? Or are they people that are trying to deceive you? Where's your head? Certainly taking you away from worldly pleasures, but it's all good things, right? And it's all worth it, and it's all decisions that you finally come down to. Yeah, I get it now. That I don't know how you'd even understand that before when you're trying to determine that cost.
That's really the point at which we say all in dedication. That's the step of excellence, right? You can be in for salvation.
Right.
I've believed in Jesus, but I'm trusting in Him for heaven, but I'm not trusting in Him for this life, right? And that's that cost where am I all in for this life. That's why we use that term around here.
Yeah, I guess that's true. All in, because
All in.
usually think about it as, okay, I'm in on this part. All right, I'm in on this part. I'm in on this part. But it's at some point it is all in.
Well, we really don't know what all in means,
Right.
because we don't
Because we're
get it
never
all in
and we're
one,
never all in.
and we're never really all in.
I think we are.
Right. But it's that commitment to being all in. I want to be all in. I'm going to try to be all in. And as I learn more and I go through the loop and the steps, I want to be in more and more and more. But today I have to make a decision. I'm going to be all in. Right.
Yeah. So
That's
again, I even had in
excellence.
my notes, right? This isn't a salvation issue.
No.
It's a discipleship issue.
Yeah, salvation doesn't cost us.
Right.
Salvation is free. It's a gift. It costs God. It doesn't cost us.
Right.
Discipleship costs us everything.
Yeah. Interesting point.
Yeah.
So, but yet we are called to make disciples too.
Yes.
Right. Yep. So it's what we need to be doing. It's what God wants us to do. What Jesus wants us to do. So it's worthwhile.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, I think we covered it for this week.
Okay. Good.
2 chapters in 10 minutes. How's that?
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
Right? Who's counting? Right?
Depends on how you
are.
edit it.
Yeah. It always looks better in editing and processing, right? Well, that brings us to the end of week 11 video. So we'll be back next week with week number 12 and just keep plugging away through the Gospel of Luke. As always, we'd love to hear your comments, so make sure you send those to us. Just because we didn't, in fact, specifically because we don't mention something, we'd love to hear what
exactly.
you see. And
Everybody sees something different.
Yeah, and I really like that. Stuff that I would just gloss over, you would just gloss over, like, oh, everybody knows
Somebody
that.
phone.
Yeah. We want to hear what hits you really hard. So,